And good evening. I'd like to welcome you to yet another edition of the Columbus Report. I'm Jason Grzgorek. Welcome to the March edition, in which I am very fortunate to take to the other side of the aisle, in which we are going to the Senate. And I'm very fortunate to have, for his first time here, Mr. Lou Terhar of the 8th District. Lou, glad you could join us.
Thank you for the invitation, Jason.
You are always welcome here at the table. Since it is your first time, and for those who are unfamiliar with the face, you, of course, are now the new representative senator, I should say, for the 8th District, taking over for Mr. Seitz.
Correct.
Which is some pretty big shoes to fill, don't you feel?
He is a very competent and learned individual.
Oh, he is. We do miss him so already, but we are glad to have you taking his place, in which you will be here. You are not unfamiliar to Ohio politics, of course. This is your first in the Senate, but you have been in the House before, prior to that, correct?
That's correct.
Starting in 2012 was your official run. You did do a little time in 2011.
Yes, actually I did, and ran in 12.
And ran in 12.
And in 14.
And, of course, was successful. What was your drive to be politically minded as you are today?
Several things I think are germane. The first is I'm a Naval Academy graduate, and you learn duty out of country, which means you have a duty to serve if you think you could do something. In 2010 and 11, with the major change in the political landscape in Ohio, I thought with my business background I could bring something to putting Ohio back on a track that was more economically attractive, both to the people who live here and companies who'd come here. The second was even more important. It was a personal issue, not an issue actually. My wife and I had been married 39 years at that point. She ran for a seat on the State Board of Education, which actually means you run in 3 Senate seats. So she ran in all of Hamilton, all of Warren County. I went out and campaigned with her, realized that things were very much different in Ohio and how people were reacting than they were when I was a kid at Elder High School. And she was elected. I got another little more insight into what was going on in Ohio. Mm-hmm. And when the opportunity arose and I was asked if I wanted to join the House, I thought, yes, I certainly do.
And, of course, you did. What would you say your greatest accomplishments were during your tenure, so to speak, in the House?
While I was in the House, I passed a number of bills. Those range from passing autism insurance for children in Ohio, both for those who are on Medicaid and those who are state employees, but also those who work in businesses. So businesses are now required to have a rider for the insurance for autism treatment for children. Mm-hmm. We passed several bills. I was the chairman of the Financial Institutions and Housing and Urban Development Committee of the House. So we passed several bills that reformed financial institutions in Ohio, that meaning banks, credit unions, all the way down through mortgage lenders, installment loan lenders. And we also changed part of the HUD code on fair housing in Ohio to make it more balanced with the federal code.
And, of course, once your House terms were limited, Senate came calling. Did Mr. Seitz come calling too, or what made the Senate jump?
Actually, I wasn't term limited in the House, but Senator Seitz was term limited in the Senate. Senator Seitz and I have known each other since he was my antitrust attorney and my first CEO job in 1989. And I know him to be an incredibly competent person who works very hard and does a fine job. He had previously been in the House and went to the Senate, did his 8 years in the Senate, and he now sits in my seat, the 30th District, which is Greene, Delhi, Cheviot, and West Bryce Hill.
Sure. So you know our West Side viewers, so to speak, of the viewing area, and now you're coming in to a more broad area here in the 8th District. Do you find that those same items and ideals that were facing you in the 30th are definitely issues that still affect the 8th and broader?
They still affect the 8th, but they're broader and they're different. We sit in Forest Park that has some unique challenges. We have some school districts that are not as effective and efficient as some others. And I had Oak Hills and Northwest before, as well as the city of Cincinnati. And now it goes through a whole broad range because the Senate seat goes all the way to Sycamore Township. Right. So there is we need to figure out how to get more parity for opportunity for children, and education is the best way to do that. And in this particular case, we have some issues that we need to deal with.
That's fair. Looking at your campaign from going from representative to Senate, I think you were in two different governmental climates, so to speak. I think that historically we were seeing some shifts and changes in that political landscape. Do you feel the same way, and do you think that affected in any way any changes that may have come to your Senate seat or to the state of Ohio in general?
That's a great question, and it's interesting because although there have been great changes, and this change at the federal level obviously was a sea change in
Absolutely.
politics, the House and the Senate have been supermajority Republican in Ohio for 6 years, and we've held all 5 state seats from governor all the way down through the auditor. So in Ohio, the national election made it even stronger. We actually picked up, we now have 24 of the 33 seats in the Senate as the Republicans, and the House has 66 of the 99 seats in the Ohio House. So that the impact of the national election on Ohio politics, as far as what policies have we tried to engender, where have we come from, where are we still trying to go, I think we go through the next continuum of this. The difference of operation between the House and the Senate is something that you have to quickly become aware of. The budget's a perfect example. The budget is out. Constitutionally, money bills go to the House first. So we allow, without interference, the House to do their work. They take the governor's budget. The House then determines what they believe is the best budget and the changes they want to make. And so far, those appear to be fairly substantial, as they've been before.
Sure.
It will then come to the Senate right about Easter. And constitutionally, we must pass a balanced budget by June 30th.
Correct.
So for us, we get it in the Senate, and normally what will happen is we will look at what the House did, concur with some of those things, but we won't agree with all of them. And we will then change the budget again. We will then vote the budget out. The House will, it will be sent to the House for concurrence. They will not concur. We will go into committee, and the committee will work out the differences, and the budget will be completed. So in a lot of ways, it's a good basic objective lesson in democracy. This is the way things are supposed to work. It also allows a minority, and the minority is now fairly small,
Right.
to have their input into the budget, because everybody's voice is important, and the budget is the base for the working agreements we have for the next 2 years, which is the other reason that we tend to be fairly bureaucratic's a bad word, principled as to how the budget's considered. We, as the Senate, do not interfere with the House's work, and then when they send us what they send us, we do what we do.
Now, being from both sides, so to speak, are you seeing anything different? Has your perception changed? I mean, obviously now you're, instead of being on that first receiving line of the budget, you're on that second end. Are you a bit more anticipatory, since you already know how it's going to be vetted the first time? I mean, obviously you won't know exactly, but you have an idea of how it's going to be taken care of. Do you see a difference at this point? I mean, I know it's very early on, but
Actually, we've already been in session for 2 months. We went in the 3rd of January,
Right.
So we've been at it every week since then. And the difference, I think, is that of the folks I serve with in the House, 70% are still there. I know what they think. I know how they operate. I know what issues they're going to have. And I have a fairly strong indicator of what's coming, and the things that I agreed with in the House, I'll agree with when I'm in the Senate. There are some things that we did in the House that I would have preferred had been done differently, and if I can prevail on my colleagues in the Senate to have a little bit different view on a couple of the issues in the budget, then I'll do that.
we hear a lot. Buzzwords fly, and bipartisan is always the big one. And with us having such a large majority and a smaller minority in regards to party, do you feel that, and we've discussed, maybe not you and I, but others at the table have discussed, that they see a shift and a change in that bipartisanship, and that it is occurring more often than most people will say, because, again, it's that buzzword, well, if we had a bipartisanship. Do you not see that in the state of Ohio?
I think we have been doing that since I've been in the House, even though we've had the majority and it had just turned. Has it developed? Yes, it has. Is it important to have a bipartisan, but as much as you can? Both parties got elected on different platforms, and you have to stick with your platform. However, there are principles that you want to achieve, and there are different ways to achieve those principles in practical ways that don't necessarily change the principle that you stand for. The folks in the minority have all been around for a while. They've got experiences, and they represent, in many cases, a different group of folks than we do. All of those people are Ohioans. So if we can come together and come with the best compromise that we can and still maintain what we said to the voters to get elected we would do, then we were foolish if we don't do that.
It's fair. Obviously, you as the Senate have not seen the entire budget yet. From what I'm told, it's, as always, a very large tome to read. But from what I've spoken to with Mr. Blessing as well as Mr. Deaver, that, education is back and it's heavy in the bill, as well as heroin, which is something that has already been passed within the Senate as well from Senate Bill 1 dealing with heroin. We spoke off camera a little bit already in regards to that it's not just a state issue. It is much far global. Is it not our right as the state to start making those mandates and cleaning our state first and helping the federal? Is that basically how you envision the state helping in this global catastrophe?
Well, there are a couple of things the state has been doing and needs to be more aggressive in doing. The first thing we need to do is ensure that those who are victims of heroin addiction don't end up in prison because they're drug users. Do drug dealers go to prison? Absolutely. Those who make their living doing this, well, we should ensure make the rest of their living doing it in a small room. Those who are addicted, and heroin being particularly insidious because by the second hit, you no longer have the choice to move. It hits a receptor in your brain, and you now need this all the time. One of the things we need to do as a state, and we did in the capital budget for Hamilton County the last time, and I was still in the House, but running for the Senate, is we got money for the Center for Addiction Treatment downtown, and they said if we could get some money, we could take part of the inpatients and move them and then add some more beds, et cetera. Well, the size of the problem is much greater than that, so we said to them, well, you have a building, if you had your own freestanding outpatient clinic, what could you do with the current facility since it's already secure? And they said, well, we could double what we do. So we provided the first $2 million, and they have raised the rest to be able to do that. That makes you feel good, but feeling good doesn't solve a problem.
Correct.
In that, so we would have, if we could have 1,000 beds, the sheriff says that he believes we have 16,000 heroin addicts in Hamilton County alone. And it's growing at a rate of about 20% a year. And the fact that we have drugs that will bring people back from an overdose and keep them alive does nothing to be able to get them off the drug. It just brings them back alive.
You're saving a life, but are you truly saving them by getting them off the
Well, you certainly have saved them in the short run, but
Sure.
That's not a long-term solution. So I believe that the biggest solution that we can do both at the state and at the city and county level, quite frankly, is to aggressively come through with ways to be able to expand the treatment and the facilities for people to be treated in, and to aggressively support the not-for-profits who do most of this work.
Because it is growing so exponentially, do you feel that it is still manageable and is going to be something that we can eventually, obviously not eliminate in a year or 2 years, but be able to manage and be able to wrangle it in so that it can become a non-existent problem?
I think that what we can do is part of a much more overarching issue. The wall, the euphemism, the wall. Is it really a wall? Will it end up being a wall? My guess is probably not. But the concept of stopping the flow of the drugs across the southern border, none of this stuff grows here. This is all imported.
It's all imported. That's true.
The only way you can cut down on the ability of more people to become users is to drive up the price and reduce the supply. This is basic economics. And the only way to do that is to control the access to the drug, and the only way to control the access to the drug is control the access to the borders. So although many people want to take the wall as strictly an immigration issue, I don't. For me, the most positive impact on society immediately would be the restriction of the flow of drugs into the country, particularly heroin.
I like the way that you actually bring that as a euphemism. I will get this today. I'm so early morning. Anyway, because most people actually think of it as everything. It's very concrete, literally concrete, and wants to make that stop. But by actually giving it a bit more teeth, as you are here, showing that it is more than just a physical being, that if you stop one thing, that impenetrable wall, that protection will be at a different level. Obviously, we're far away from the wall, so to speak, from that southern border. But we are also talking about borders amongst, because one of the things that our president has spoken about is that he wants all our borders to be protected. Obviously, you cannot put a very large wall in the ocean. It makes for bad travel. However, I think you bring out the best point in that, is that we need protection from one form or another. It's not just, as you're saying, an immigration issue.
And part of the thing that people don't understand is that these drug folks are incredibly brutal people, and many of those folks who come across the border are used as mules to bring it, and if they go over successfully and deliver, then their children come. So there is kidnapping, there's extortion, there are all kinds of things that go along. This is not a commercial enterprise like McDonald's. This is a whole different, this is something we have to deal with in a holistic fashion. And you said, yeah, we're far from it, but I spent the weekend in Washington, part of the weekend in Washington, with a friend of mine who is a senior representative in the Texas House, and his district is right on the border. And he spends time writing with the Border Patrol, and can give you firsthand information that this is not all about poor struggling people coming across the border to find a new life. Are there those people in that group? Absolutely. Do they need a bunch of the people to make this a mass move so that the folks who are carrying the drugs across get across? Yes, they do. We've got to be able to control and sort what happens, and until we find a way to be able to control and sort, the flow of drugs in the country will continue unabated, and the number of addicts continues to grow at an alarming rate. And honestly, Hamilton County is the most affected county in Ohio.
And that's scary to think, don't you think? And things that go into my mind is that we've been dealing with a drug war, so to speak, for many years, and it is either ebbed and flowed. And I think we've gone into this very dark place when it comes to this drug war. We are doing many things to help save lives. Do you feel that there will be a time that we will be able to have helped enough people that this portion of the drug war or the drug problem has been eliminated?
I think there are two things that impact that primarily. The first is the person who uses and why they use, and do those people have the opportunities and the reasons not to do that? And that is economic opportunity and education. The other piece is, how do you make it more difficult for people to get themselves in that situation? And that is controlling the flow. And drugs is too much of a generic term. We are all up to super hard drugs. Fentanyl and heroin they're putting, fentanyl is basically a tranquilizer for elephants. And that's now, and if you have no idea where this came from and who mixed it. So, there you find people who still have a needle in their arm, didn't get any further than that, and you can't bring them back, especially when you get a hot shot with fentanyl. So this is now gone way past the who's smoking marijuana in a car on Friday night. This is a whole different life. And we got to find a way, one, to give people the opportunity to say, there's not a reason for me to do that. In fact, it's deleterious to my future if I do. And the other piece that is critical is we have to find a way for people who say, I've made a mistake, I need help, and we got to get them the help. And we are woefully behind the power curve on getting that done, mostly because the wave of this stuff, it's interesting that it got cheap, and it got cheap in a hurry. And part of that is because When we were in Afghanistan, a lot of the growing was eliminated. Taliban now runs Afghanistan, or big portions of it, and Mexico used to supply both Europe and the United States, and not just Mexico, South America. And now suddenly that European market's gone because stuff from Afghanistan is going there. So supply and demand says if it's still coming out of South America and the market's smaller, you make the product cheaper and more people use it. So it's one of those pieces of the whole economics of this problem that we have to attack and make people aware that they are being used. This is not something that will make your life better. This is something that will destroy you, and you can't take a shortcut to these things.
I think we are very fortunate in Hamilton County to have something as wonderful as the Heroin Task Force, and has probably helped more people than we know. Is that not still being used as a model for the state?
The idea is certainly a model, but the problem, and we have to separate between actions we take that aim at doing something and actually getting it done. The Heroin Task Force does a lot of great things, raises awareness, gets information out. But part of the problem is if you get somebody arrested, they go to jail, and they say, I want to quit. You've got to get them then, and you got to get them a treatment program. Mm-hmm. We don't have that. So, and the jail keeps filling up because folks who use this have to find ways to be able to supply that habit, and they turn to things that are illegal to do that.
Which has been a problem for a long time.
And it feeds on itself. Now we've got people who say, I want to quit. We don't have a place to send them. They've got to wait. And if you're a heroin user, you can't wait. You need the next hit because you are addicted. So you're also released from jail because all the people are pushing into the jail every day. And the problem just continues to grow on itself. So it's not, do we need a bigger jail? It's where can we find to send people to treat them, mm-hmm. because we don't have treatment facilities.
And to think that was never really the thought process 20 years ago. Get them in, get them out, or keep them in.
And 20 years ago, some of the drugs of choice were literally drugs of choice. You could be much more easily removed from the situation. Heroin does not give you that opportunity. This is a different game.
With the hopes of cutting the supply and making that happen, is there not always the fear that there's going to be the next big wave, something else, God forbid, worse than that?
Yeah, again, there can only be a big wave of something else worse than that if you have a market that wants it. And we have to get back to the basic root issue of how do we make economic opportunity much more available for everyone, and how do we ensure that we have educated people who can take advantage of that opportunity when it comes.
Sounds like the state has a lot to look towards and to battle, so to speak. Are we, the state, ready to fight that battle?
I think on the education front, we have done better and better and better. We have the third grade reading guarantee and the NAEP scores, which are the scores that are literally not just U.S. scores, they are worldwide scores. The only set of NAEP scores, the only grade that did better was the fourth grade, because we now require children to learn to read before they leave the third grade. Those things are important. The state of Ohio, in total, Ohio spends well over, on average, per pupil in the public schools, $12,500 a pupil a year. We have some cities that spend $18,000 a pupil. The issue isn't, do we have enough money? The issue is efficacy, if you will. Are we efficient and effective in what we do and how we do it? Most of the rest of the world does not let kids out of school in May and bring them back in September.
Fair.
So you ask any teacher, and she will tell you, or he, that it takes the first 6 weeks to teach kids the things they forgot. So if you take 6 weeks a year, and you take the 6 weeks out of a school schedule and you multiply that by 12, how far behind is a 12th grade graduate in the United States compared to a 12th grade graduate somewhere else in the world? The math will give you the answer pretty quickly.
Sure.
It's not pretty. We also, with the third grade reading guarantee, hopefully will stop social promotion. It is unfair to promote kids through school and give them a diploma when they can't read and they can't do math. One of the bills I passed in the House right at the end last year was the financial literacy bill, which provided money and a curriculum to teach teachers how to teach financial literacy principles to first through sixth grade students. and inculcate it into language arts and math so they get used to learning these things in the normal subjects, so that we don't get kids into college who come out with enormous debts and have no clue how they got it and what it costs to get rid of it and how much the interest rate costs. Those are things that they should know before they get to high school.
That's very fair. You are watching the Waycross Community Media's Columbus Report here with Senator Lou Terhar and myself discussing all things the state of Ohio. Right now we are deep into educational issues and matters that are affecting you. You're bringing up a wonderful thing in regards to the idea of the change in schools. You touched just enough about summer vacation. We don't want to tell people we don't like vacation. However, those loss of months can be loss of pieces of vital information to continue that education. We're seeing here at Wittenwood Schools, and as well as Northwest Schools, the change in the idea of learning, with Wittenwood's using a new technology model, project-based learning, as well as more of an educational off-site learning programs in Northwest. Do you feel that those are just the small steps that are going to continue, or do you feel that we may see a complete change eventually come in the educational process?
I think one of the things people have to realize in Ohio is that Ohio is a unique state in its constitution in several ways. And one of those ways is local control clause, which says that anything that is not directly the state's business belongs controlled at the local level. Education has always been held as one of those things. And the Ohio Department of Education can make the requirements for what you need to do to get a diploma to graduate from high school in Ohio.
Right.
But it cannot set the books. We are not a textbook state. We are not a curriculum state. They can only give a suggested curriculum, can't enforce it. So you need to get people to realize that the reason your kids may not be getting the education that they should falls directly to your local school board, and you elected them. So if that school board is doing a good job, you should make sure that you let them know. And if they're not doing a good job, you should also make sure that they know, and those meetings are open to the public.
True.
It is not up to the state, nor should the state go to individual districts unless they are failing. Literally, the children are failing. And in the case of Youngstown, when I was in the House, we took over the schools in Youngstown because they had been the worst in the state, and these children had been failing for 6 years, and it just wasn't getting any better. In that case, we felt we had an obligation under the Constitution for the Equal Opportunity Clause, which said every child has to have an opportunity to succeed, and those children were not getting that opportunity. Unfortunately, we have a lot of school districts in the state where children are not getting the opportunity, and it's not necessarily the school's fault. We have social issues that deal with that. This is the first year that we have greater than 50% of the students in Ohio public schools that have either zero or only one parent in the home. That's a very different model than when I went to school.
Sure, absolutely. Do you feel this is a growing trend?
Well, statistically, we know it is. So
fair.
My feelings aren't as important as the numbers.
As the numbers.
But what it does say is you have to deal with a completely different mission. Reading, writing, arithmetic are not the only things that schools have to do. Now, the question is it something else teachers have to do, or do you need to provide mentor programs, fund mentor programs, do things that will allow the schools to do surrogate things and expose children to things they may not be exposed to at home because the home environment is different? And those are things that we have to more aggressively pursue. The issue in the United States, and we're very good at deciding what number is your state among the other states ranked in education.
Yeah.
My answer always is, it doesn't matter. We don't compete with California and Indiana and Florida. We compete with hundreds of countries in the world, all of whom believe that they should have an economic advantage. And their economic advantage usually is based on educational prowess of their citizens. And so once we take on board that how we do against other states isn't really material, and that we have to make sure that we can once again lead the world. If you look at the scores, both for English and math, the United States and the industrialized world is now in the 30s. It wasn't 10 years ago, we were in the top 10. We are not anymore.
Where did that shift happen?
I don't think the schools have gotten worse. I think teachers still work hard, probably harder than they ever did. We have children coming with a different background or a lack of a background that we used to take for granted. How many children would just assume that Johnny and Susie can probably read, or at least they know the alphabet, could count, do lots of things when they get to the first grade? Well, not so much anymore. So we end up with students who come in with different levels of preparation for what they need to do and different levels of reinforcement at home. How many kids actually learn to read at school or learn to read because they took books home and somebody sat and read with them and corrected them as they learned to read? If you don't have that, then the disparity out of the box gets greater and greater, and you can't fix that. So the only way that can happen is we have to look at a new model that says, this is what schools do, this is the whole range of needs that a child has to be successful. How do you supply some of those other needs if it's not in the current school system? And we lived out of the country twice, so our children have gone to school outside of the United States.
So you firsthand know exactly.
And we've never been anywhere where they got more than 5 weeks off in a row. It just doesn't happen because they believe that it's difficult for the children to stay focused, that they end up getting themselves, they got to bring them back and get them reset. And so they give them as much time off as the kids get here. They get it off at different times and in different ways.
And again, that does follow a very European style of work ethic and model as well. I mean, I know, I'm not
Asians
sure.
are the same.
Asians the same way? Okay. I'm a little more familiar with the more European model, but I mean, if you're following that style from other parts of the world, is it not almost making us feel, again, far behind?
Well, the numbers say we are. So
And
I'm a data person.
And we'll get to that. No, but listening to certain aspects of what you're saying in regards to the idea of what a school's role is and what we need for a child for the state of Ohio, that change comes, and is it not a very slippery slope to go into where there are many nurturing aspects that need to be looked at as well? And is that not a fearful thing to be able to go into before a parent says, that's my job, why are you doing my job? Before the state comes back and says, well, you should have been doing that job to begin with. Does that not start a new battle?
It starts a potential issue, but the real question is, whose right is a greater? The right of the parent as a parent to do exactly what they want, or the right of the child to have a future? And that has to be adjudicated. Fair,
very fair. Of course, you are all looking for the greater good of the future citizens of Ohio, the future root movers and shakers. And the hardest thing going from K through 12 and then 12 forward is that recidivism, being able to keep them here. Let's talk a little bit about higher education. How do we keep our best and brightest who are going to Xavier, UC, OSU, OU, Toledo, everywhere? They don't want to stay.
Well, actually, over 50% don't. So the numbers are more college graduates leave Ohio than stay in Ohio. And back to a horrible parallel, but back to the parallel of the drug problem.
Sure.
People go and do where they see their opportunity to go and do something is. And if they don't see the opportunity in Ohio, then they'll go and do it somewhere else. The issue is to provide, it's not to provide, in my opinion, government doesn't provide jobs. Government doesn't provide employment opportunities. Government should set a tone that allows growth of jobs and opportunities in a place where someone who's an entrepreneur says, I want my business to be there. Ohio does a wonderful job in developing business ideas. Some of the best incubators in the Midwest are here. The problem, of course, is that once the idea comes out of the incubation stage in a fairly conservative state like Ohio, getting A and B round funding, which is what you need to get the business model up and moving, usually doesn't originate from here. And the best and brightest of those are they end up around Boston or they end up in Northern California. And although we as taxpayers do a considerable amount to make sure that a lot of these incubators can work well, the fact that those folks don't necessarily stay here is probably our fault. I had a bill 5 years ago that said if you can get people to invest in private equity groups or venture capital groups, but mostly venture capital in this case, that will invest in these Ohio startups and leave the money in Ohio, if we say to them, you don't have to pay capital gains tax on that if the company stays in Ohio when you cash out and it gets bigger and moves on, wouldn't that be a good idea? I still think that's a good idea, and I will try to push that one more time, mostly because those opportunities for the people we just talked about, they're following the opportunity, and we're not keeping the opportunity here even when it starts here in many cases.
Well, why I'm kind of bringing it kind of almost full circle is one of the things that you brought out. You are an economic man. And you're proving it. You're very data driven and everything to that effect. I've used this analogy many times, and I'm sure my audience is probably really tired of hearing me say it, but it is the best one because our old slogan for the state of Ohio was the heart of it all. I don't think we've ever lost our heart, but we're not that heart of it all anymore. And sure, many things have gone on and have changed and have evolved, but usually our state was the one to help it make that evolution. What happened? What did we dry up? Where did we dry up? And why aren't we back up at the top?
I think a couple of things economically have changed. First, the population of Ohio continues to drop. We currently have 16 congressmen. I remember having to learn when I was in high school the 24 congressmen that were in Ohio. Well, we don't have 24.
Right.
So Ohio, the population has continued to drop. The types of jobs have changed dramatically. Unions don't have nearly the amount of members that they once had. And a lot of those jobs were in the north. And if you look at a map, you can see where the southwestern Ohio is getting larger and northern Ohio is getting smaller. Then you have the growth in government. Columbus is getting much bigger. And you can find a couple of businesses there.
A few. Just a few.
But however, the big growth is in a governmental institution like Ohio State or the state of Ohio. And we need to get ourselves refocused into the basic economic tenet that says government does not produce wealth, government consumes wealth. And the only way you grow job opportunities is to increase the wealth that somebody wants to have a piece of. And to get that, he has to use other people to work to help him get there. And we're not doing a very good job at doing that. Bringing other companies from other states to Ohio, in the grand scheme of things, doesn't increase wealth at all. It just shifted it to get people here, and it took money from every Ohioan's pocket to pay for the tax concessions they got to come. Okay. When you grow new businesses and opportunities here, and in the governor's budget, to give him his due, whether or not it will work, I don't know. But the idea of the driverless car and investing to do that at the tracks and through OSU and some other schemes that we have here in Ohio to try to get a jump on the next piece of technology and where the industry goes, I think it's an excellent idea. It's a good example of 20 or 30 we should be doing, not one. And if the state makes those opportunities more available, people will gravitate to be able to do that because that's where they see the future.
Sure. I mean, I know that we've always heard the adage from Mark Twain in regards to Cincinnati being a bit behind.
Yeah.
Just a bit. But yet, if you look at what's happening, yeah, we're catching up. I think we're starting to see that turn. Is there enough of that momentum starting? And a lot of people will say maybe it's too late, but is that enough to start southward, moving north, to bring people in, or sweeping them up from the north and keeping, again, because we've got some, Norwood has that great business incubator there that's been generating some wonderful new ideas. Isn't it time to start?
Oh, we have the Branderie, we have Cincy Tech, we have a whole range of things here.
Sure.
And they have some, NEO, Northeast Ohio, has one that rivals ours, in my opinion. They do a very good job. Columbus has a group that works. the point is, so does every other state's doing the same thing.
Sure.
So you have to determine what is it we can be good at. What do we have in Ohio? I mean, this is a basic strategy question. What do we have in Ohio that we can build off of? What educationally where do we have an opportunity, particularly through our higher education, to be able to start from a place that we can move forward quickly? And how can we more effectively take what goes on in Ohio's schools, especially the research schools, and commercialize that to Ohio's benefit, since the taxpayers are paying a big hunk of the load to get those ideas to come to fruition. And that is the next piece of how do you, it's not just K through 12 education, it's what do you do with, and are we subsidizing some of that research with tuition money that gives debt to students that shouldn't rightfully be theirs? Who should be paying for that, and how are we paying for that? And that's the next set of, it'll be interesting when the budget comes over, but honestly, I am on the Senate subcommittee for Health and Human Services and Medicaid, because that's half the budget, and we have to figure out what we're going to do. And in the end, that's the bill you pay first. So until this gets fixed, until we have a reasonable system for that to happen, and that again goes back to Washington, and do they block grant back? I spent the discussion with somebody in Washington on Friday, and I said, she was a senior person from Arizona, and I said, under the law, we have a state that is dramatically different than yours. We have a demographic that is very different than yours. We have a population base that is very different than yours. We have 2 cities that are in the top 20 in poverty in the United States in our state. You have none. But we have to run exactly the same system, because that's what the law says. Medicaid works like this. Well, if we block grant back to the states, each state has to figure out, what are the things I need to do in my state? And the only way we can, taking this full circle, the only way we can build out the things we need to do in education and opportunity and the things we need to do in Ohio is to ensure that where we spend most of our money is how do we build the state. Right now, we spend most of our money on healthcare.
Right.
I don't think that's sustainable for the long term.
As you said, the major majority of that bill is set aside for that. You got to look at that other side, which is so many other slivers of pie that you have to look at that may need some greater. That's where some of the things I feel almost are going through those cracks. That, well, because we couldn't get to this, we have to go to that. Is that part of the issue?
It's part of the issue in that you have to balance what you do with the budget with how much you take out of people's pocket. So if you say, oh, we should be able to do this, we'll fund these things. Well, as soon as you start to raise taxes again in Ohio, then we become non-competitive for people who want to stay here, because there are a lot cheaper states around us to operate in.
And again, we were just talking about, keeping people in. We don't want people to start flocking out because of X, Y, and Z. We need. One of the things that always pops into my head when we look at these things, and I love hearing the future, the talk of the future, the possibility of the trackless car and things of that nature, and those things that could propel us forward. Did we rest on our laurels, the things that we were so good at for so long, that we just said, well, it'll come back?
Well, if you think about where Ohio grew from Rockefeller in the oil industry, that moved away, and then Ohio became a major influence in the car industry, not just building cars, but as tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers.
Right.
If you look at the market share of American car makers and things done in America, although Chrysler is now actually Fiat, it's not Chrysler, sure. Those things have dropped dramatically. And in fact, most of the U.S. car makers make their money on trucks. They don't make money on cars. So the whole issue of, why did the Rust Belt get rusty? The Rust Belt got rusty not because people didn't want the things.
No.
The Rust Belt got rusty because they started coming from somewhere else.
Is there anything that can revive it? We've talked about a few things, but
I don't know that you want to revive it the way it was. What
Sure.
you have to do is determine what does the future bring? What do people want, and what do we have? Back to the universities. If we have a lot of these things coming out, particularly places like Ohio State, how do we commercialize those and do 2 things? 1, have them here in Ohio so they provide opportunities for people in Ohio, 1, and 2, spin off some of the money from commercializing that to support other research to bring the next things that we are good at coming out of our universities. What we're good at is not necessarily what we used to do, it's what we're going to do. And what we're going to do is based on what is it that we do well where we have a competitive advantage, particularly to universities.
And I think the hardest part is being able to change that a person's mind if they're not willing to make that change.
Economics is an interesting thing. It's whether or not you feel that you like the answer you get or you don't, the science of economics says, I'm sorry, that's the answer. And people have to determine whether they're going with it or they're not.
Almost very black and white.
It's a fairly arcane and strict science.
Well, we are getting close to the bottom of the hour, and I always like to leave this portion up to you. Obviously, we are into March, therefore you have been in session for a little bit of time, of course. We were talking off camera about a few things that you've started. If you care to talk about anything that you are beginning or have passed already, that'd be a great time to bring them forward.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely.
But first, let me follow up on education, because I actually have a bill, Senate Bill 8, and as you're probably aware, the top 10 bills are the bills that are considered the most important ones coming out. And Senator Gardner and I have a bill. We have in Ohio the Ohio School Facilities Commission, which builds buildings. Mm-hmm. The way that is set up, the school districts that have the least money and are in the most difficulties get the money first, so that the vast majority of middle and more well-to-do communities get very little from that facility. We have a bill that says we also have some of these districts, many of them, who have the levies to the point where people can't give anymore. And those schools, in some cases, are 50, 70, 80 years old. Doesn't mean the schools are bad. Many of the buildings are in great shape. The school I went to high school in was built in 1923. Still looks the same on that first floor as it did when I was in high school. A lot of schools aren't like that.
Correct.
But most importantly, they weren't built with information technology infrastructure, mm-hmm. but now even more importantly, security issues. And since Chardon, which I know is not, many people in southern Ohio may not be aware, but the shooting in the school at Chardon, which is in northern Ohio, was because the school was completely open and shooter could get in anywhere. Part of that issue was also that took place in New England. So one of the bills that we have offered to the Senate is that we should take part of a small portion of the money that's in the Ohio Schools Facility Commission control and allow these school districts that will never see any of that money to get a small piece to be able to take care of their security issues. So we have the ability to lock a school down. We have the ability to funnel traffic through one central port where it can be controlled. A lot of these old buildings hit all the offices and everything in the middle, so everybody traipses to the center. You need, obviously, them out at an edge where those things can be filtered. So that's one bill that's out. Another, and I was the chair of the Financial Institutions Committee of the House for my last 2 years, Ohio's, one of the other pieces you need to ensure a vibrant economy and provide jobs is a good basic infrastructure of financial institutions, from banks and credit unions down through, installment loans and mortgage lenders for homes, et cetera, et cetera. And our part of the Ohio Revised Code is, to put it politely, is a mess. So I started to take this apart when I was in the House and got it to start moving. We now have in the Senate my bill, which is a Consumer Loan Installment Act bill, and Senator Coley has the new banking reform bill. I understand from my friends in the House, in fact, I think Representative Deaver will get this bill in his committee because he's now the chair of my old committee.
Yes.
The credit union reform bill and the mortgage reform bill, the first one we passed that actually Representative Deaver wrote and went through the committee when I was still the chair and passed in the House last time. So we have the first step of reform on foreclosure, how that's done, rights of people in foreclosure rather than the bank or the lender.
Right.
We now have to take the next step of that and tighten down on how mortgages are originated, how mortgages move through, to ensure that not that we keep people from doing business, but we have a set of the declarations that are required so the borrower knows exactly what he does and what rights he has and where he goes. So that, to me, is going to be that's probably a 4-year project. We will do these one piece at a time. Some of these bills are enormous. The amount of regulation, because you have to take everything into account, including the federal stuff like Dodd-Frank, which is for somebody whose background is in business and economics, Dodd-Frank is just a train wreck. And a lot of things have been laid on as requirements that are completely superfluous or that organization doesn't do, but they get inspected for them anyway, and then they have to pay the fee. And that's not a way to build good businesses.
No.
Now, we can't change Dodd-Frank, but we can change the way we classify institutions in Ohio to determine who is going to be subject to that and who isn't. So that is all right now ongoing. And then I have a couple of veterans bills. I always say veterans bills.
I was going to say, from a former veteran, I would assume you would absolutely have some.
And so the last term we passed the Vets ID bill. So in Ohio, if you are a veteran and you take your discharge papers, then as a DD 214, to your county recorder, you will get a Vets ID card that is an Ohio ID card taken and issued by your county recorder. But most importantly, he is, under the Constitution, an official records repository. So once he has your DD 214, no matter what the VA says, if we have somebody who has an issue or somebody needs veterans court or a whole range of things, our county recorder can send them that DD 214, and it's an official record.
That seems very helpful. And I'm glad that you're able to do that. And we actually are at the bottom of the hour. You just made it in time.
Thank you.
So I want to thank you for joining us for the first of many times that I hope to see you here and joining us to discuss the issues that affect the 8th District.
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank you for joining us as well. You have been watching the Columbus Report here on Waycross Government Access. I'm Jason Grisgork, Waycross Community Media's Government Access Coordinator, giving you the opportunity to speak to those in the know in your district. Have a great evening. We'll see you next time.